Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the battleships which were canceled because of World War II, and what different countries' fleets would have looked like if World War II never happened or was delayed. So the prompt here is Hitler tells all of his admirals that there's no way there's going to be a war until 1945. And so the German Navy makes plans to start building ships so that they can not match Great Britain, but at least have similar parity to Great Britain by 1945. As it happens, within months of saying this, in 1939, Hitler invades Poland. The Allies stop with appeasement and get involved, and World War II begins. Hitler is able to destroy many of the European colonial powers, or at least occupy them in Europe, which means that Japan has a relatively free hand in the Pacific and can go and take all of these colonial possessions from countries like France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain, which starts a war with the United States, which brings everyone into a world war by 1941. World War II was devastating for battleships. Battleships have a really, really long lead time. So those ships not already under construction at the beginning of World War II, basically guaranteed to not be finished by the end of the war, and thus be a waste of dry dock space, resources, and money when you really need aircraft carriers as the new weapon that have proven able to sink battleships, submarines to hunt enemy commerce, destroyers and merchant ships to convoy and hunt submarines, and all that. And so a large number of last generation battleships are canceled before they're even laid down, or canceled with relatively little construction underway. So I want to go through and look at what some of these ships would have looked like. We've already talked at length about the various naval treaties during the interwar period. So that limits battleship construction from the 1920s into the 1930s. And it means that ships can't be replaced until they're 20 years old, which within 20 years, the naval technology has changed enough during this time period to render older battleships obsolete. So World War II is fought largely with these older battleships, which otherwise would have been scrapped if there wasn't a war going on, or with newer battleships that were limited by treaties, while the unrestricted later battleships, the real top-tier cream of the crop, were never actually completed. So we're going to go through some of these classes in not too much detail. Many of them we already talk about elsewhere in this channel. And feel free to leave comments about ones that we mentioned that you would like to hear more about later down in the comment section, and we'll make videos about them in the future too. So, starting with the United States. In the 1930s, the US spent a little bit of money updating their ships. So the older battleships mostly got torpedo blisters and some extra armor on the decks to protect against aircraft. They got updated anti-aircraft armament. They got a new superstructure with fire control equipment, and their guns were able to elevate then from 15 degrees to 30 degrees. And so the new rangefinders helped them actually hit targets at that range. However, the US did not spend as much money on these ships as other countries, as you'll see later on. So, I suspect if World War II does not happen in 1939, and it's not until the mid-40s that you start to see tensions escalated, all of the older standard type battleships would likely be decommissioned. During the war, the US did do major reconstructions on some of them, Tennessee, California, and West Virginia notably, which were made very similar to modern battleships. These ships were part of the Big Five, which also included Colorado and Maryland, which did not receive much damage during the war and so never had a chance to be modernized to that extent. If any of the standard type battleships survive the 20-year scrapping process, it would have been the Big Five, and they may have been modernized like this at the beginning of a future world war around 1945. But that's a big maybe. In this, we're looking at the Second London Naval Treaty is not followed by Japan or Italy, and so it is rendered null and void. And so these unrestricted ships are built. So the United States still builds the 2 North Carolinas. They build at least 2 South Dakotas. The later 2 were added on because of the wartime emergency, and it was an existing design, so they added Massachusetts and Alabama. I'm going to say that there's enough tension in this era that they are built anyway. So we get 2 North Carolinas, 4 South Dakotas, 4 Iowas, and Illinois and Kentucky, the last 2 Iowas, were very much only built because of the war, and they were an existing design that was real easy to pump out compared to the brand new Montanas. So I'm going to say those 2 do not get built. The Navy thought that 4 fast battleships at 33 knots was enough to form a fast wing of the battle line, while the rest of the battle line would be operating around 27 or 28 knots, which is what the Montanas, North Carolinas, and South Dakotas were all designed for. And it brings up an important concept. Without aircraft carriers and fast striking forces sinking ships in World War II, the concept of using a battle line remains in effect. So you will continue to see a combination of fast and slow ships used with the concept of a battle line. And then when our fictional World War II actually happens in 1945, that is when aircraft carriers can prove their ability to sink aircraft, to sink battleships, and all these strategies change. And many of these ships that have been built with massive amounts of national treasure are rendered obsolete. So, 4 Iowas and then 5 Montana-class battleships, and the 6 Alaska-class large cruisers, which over 30,000 tons are just about the size of a treaty-type battleship. So the United States would be looking at this point at 21 modern-built capital ships from about 1941 when North Carolina is commissioned through. It would probably take until 1945 to build all the Montanas. None of them are laid down in our timeline, although they are authorized by 1941. So it would take at least 4 years to build them. The slipways to use them might have to be lengthened, like New Jersey slipway was. Ships already under construction would have to be built and launched to fit these on those slipways. And the locks of the Panama Canal would have to be enlarged, which was something that was actually planned to go along with those ships. So at least 21 modern battleships, perhaps another 5 older standard type battleships that have been modernized. And so the United States probably emerges with this timeline with the largest and most expensive and best battle line out of all of them. Let's look at, next up on our list, Great Britain. During the interwar period, Great Britain, because of the economic depression and all the treasure they spent during World War I, did not spend too much effort modernizing their capital ships, which meant right at the beginning of World War II, they had a number of ships that had either just finished modernization or were just in the process of modernization. The Queen Elizabeth-class battleships fall into this category. Warspite had been completed. Queen Elizabeth and I believe Valiant were being worked on, and Barham and Malaya never got the chance. In this timeline, all 5 of them would be modernized. The older, or the slightly newer but slower R-class battleships would be disposed of. as would any of the older battleships. Nelson and Rodney are relatively slow and may be modernized and retained. They do have 16-inch guns, so they would probably stick around and maybe be used for convoy escorts and shore bombardment. They couldn't really keep up with the British line of battle. The battlecruiser Renown is modernized, and plans for her sister ship Repulse also exist, but those are never carried out. Both of these would probably be done. They're good, fast ships that can hunt down enemy raiders. Hood also had plans to be modernized that were never took place because of the war intervening, so we would probably see a major modernization through her. 5 King George V class battleships would still be built, and 4 subsequent Lion-class battleships, 2 of which were laid down by the start of World War II, would be completed. The battleship Vanguard is sort of up in the air. She was built as a quick wartime expedient to flesh out the battlecruiser squadron, give them a 4 battlecruiser strength, much like the United States had 4 Iowas in their fast division. And she was built rapidly because she used the guns from Glorious and Courageous, which had been converted into aircraft carriers. So they were using guns that already existed. So there's an argument to be made that without a war, she might not have been built. I'm going to say the British wanted 4 ships here and would have probably built her. Interestingly, the Lion class is roughly equivalent to the Iowas. The Royal Navy never made plans for an unrestricted super battleship like Yamato, Montanas, or the H-class battleships we'll talk about later. Perhaps in our world they will. Since those plans don't exist, we don't really have a good idea of what they would look like or what they would be called. Or perhaps they will realize that the United States has surpassed them and accept second-rate status. At this point, they would have 4 fast battleships in their fast wing, and let's see, 5 Queen Elizabeths, the 2 Nelsons and Rodneys, the 5 King George V's, that's 12, and then the 4 Lion class brings them up to 16, and they're 4 fast ships to 20. So they are second best only to the United States in this theory, although their ships are significantly smaller, and they would have to expand their dockyards and building ways to go any larger than that. Turning our attention now to Germany. I'm not going to cover all of Plan Z, which was the German plan to build their fleet between 1939 and 1945 for a possible future war, taking advantage of the Anglo-German naval agreement that gives Germany 30% of the Royal Navy's capacity. Germany had Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in the fast battleship role. They had Bismarck and Tirpitz, which were completed by 1941. And then they don't have any of the older battleships to modernize because the High Seas Fleet was scuttled or taken in the case of Ostfriesland. So they're purely building new ships. They came up with a design called the H-39 class. H was Battleship H. Basically, the Germans don't assign a name to a new ship until it's being christened. So the hull, if it is an expansion, is given a letter. If it is a replacement, it is Ersatz, whatever. So if you were building a replacement for Scharnhorst, that battleship would be called Ersatz Scharnhorst until it's christened and then it's given its name, whatever that might be. If it is an expansion of your current fleet, then it gets a new letter. So there were already A, B, C, D, E, F, G that had been built, which would be the Panzerschiffs, the 3 of those, the 2 Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, which initially started as Panzerschiffs and then are redesigned as second-class battleships, and then Bismarck and Tirpitz, and then H would have been the next battleship. And there were 6 of these H-class battleships planned, prosaically named H, I, J, K, L, and M. And they are called H-39 because it was the 1939 design. Hitler says, I'm going to authorize you new battleships, Eric Rader looks around one day and says, here's a design. Let's start building it. And it's not a particularly good design. We'll talk about the H-class battleships in a future video. I know you guys are going to want that. But I will be critical, as always, of Kriegsmarine warships. So be prepared for that. These are huge ships on a displacement scale similar to the Montanas and Yamatos, although in a combat power closer to the Iowas and Lions. There are also 3 O-class battle cruisers. Remember, we got up to N with the battleships. So there were 3 O-class battle cruisers, and those would have also been large, but only armed with 6 15-inch guns. So dubious combat ability for all of that. So Germany is looking at Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, Bismarck and Tirpitz, 6 of these, so that's 10. The 3 battle cruisers, that's 13. So they're looking at about 13 brand new, modern, extremely large fighting ships. Again, are not enough to challenge the Royal Navy in a battle fleet engagement, but on a 1-for-1 engagement, any German ship should be able to defeat any British ship, with the exception of Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and the O-class battlecruisers. There was also an H-41 design, which is the last of these designs that I actually see as reasonable. I'm going to talk about all the designs in a future video on Plan Z. If you guys are interested enough, let us know in the comment section. But if Germany built another class of ships after H-39, it would have been the H-41 class. I'm not sure how many they would have built. Let's say 2 to 4 for this here. And it's not clear that they would have continued building after H-39. But maybe they build some H-41s and get up above that 13 capital ship limit. Next up, we've got Japan. Japan spends a lot of money in the interwar years upgrading their ships, although not as much as some countries. To maintain parity, I think they are going to keep all of their older ships. So it's the 4 Kongo-class battlecruisers, the 4 Fuso and Yamashiro-class battleships, and the 2 battleships Nagato and Mutsu. They are building 4 Yamatos, Yamato, Musashi, Shinano, and number 111. And they have plans for an increased Yamato-class battleship armed with 6 20-inch guns. So in this world, they continue building through that. Maybe they build 2 of those larger designs. Because Germany goes really heavy on aircraft carriers and super battleships to win a one-on-one fight, they're not going to keep up with the United States or the other eventual Allied powers with number of ships. Eventually, Japan even designed a class of ships called B-65, which is similar to the American Alaskas. And since we see a lot of these cruiser killers, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the Alaskas, Renown and Repulse being retained, the O-class battlecruisers, I think Japan would build some of these B-65 class ships. Maybe they get 4 of them, and maybe these ships are initially designed to replace the Congos as fast escorts and raiders. Otherwise, Japan doesn't really produce any designs beyond that, and that's probably the limit of what they could build resource-wise by 1945. So heading back to Europe, the other 3 countries building battleships during this period are Russia, France, and Italy. France does not spend much money updating their battleships. I don't see any of their older battleships being retained to 1945. They do build Dunkirk and Strasbourg, which more of those cruiser killers I've been talking about. They build Richelieu and Jean Bart, and there are 2 other ships in that class. I'll put air quotes on that class because they move. They're similar designs, but they move around where the main battery are. And then they design a follow-on class that is more conventionally laid out with triple 15-inch turrets. And look, they've got the capacity to build 4 of those ships, and I think that's where they end by 1945. Italy wastes a tremendous amount of money modernizing their old battleships. They change the caliber of their guns. They lengthen the ships. They add torpedo protection, anti-aircraft guns, the whole 9 yards, modern superstructures. So all 4 of their modernized ships are going to be retained, although they're outclassed by everything else everyone else has. They build 4 Littorio-class battleships, or they at least lay down, and that's the end of that. But that basically ends right around the beginning of World War II in our world, so they've got time to build some later ships. I think a future class of Italian battleships would either just be a follow-on of the Littorios to match French battleship construction. Those 2 countries did tend to match each other. Or they had a design called UP-41, which they didn't plan on building themselves, but they sold to Russia, which forms the beginning of their Soviet Soyuz battleship design. But that is more comparable to an Iowa-class battleship than what they actually built. And so maybe they build, I think they're going to build 4 more battleships. It's either an improved Littorio or this UP-41 design, or something similar enough. And then that brings us to Russia. Russia had plans for, depending on which plans you're looking at, over 20 Soviet Soyuz-class battleships, and even a couple of battle cruisers that Stalin himself was real hot for. And this would be reasonable. He builds 3 battle cruisers, and Kronstadt-class battle cruisers, builds maybe 3 of them, and builds somewhere around, I don't think they'd get 20 or 24 of these by the beginning of World War II. Russia is in an unenviable position because they basically have to operate 4 separate fleets. They've got a northern fleet in the Atlantic, they've got a Baltic fleet that has to compete with Germany, and they've got a Black Seas fleet that has to compete with Turkey. And then they've got a Pacific fleet that has to compete with Japan, who they have gone to war with in the past. So basically, none of these fleets can reinforce each other. So they each have to be of the strength of the fleet that they're fighting. So they need different shipyards and dockyard facilities and all these spaces to build all these fleets comparably. And I don't think that even by 1945 they could have built all these ships. One of the 4 that was under construction when the Soviet Union joined World War II was found to be of such shoddy workmanship that she was broken up on the ways. Another one was close to being launched, so there's all sorts of, they run the gamut here. So maybe the Soviet Union is able to build a dozen, maybe 16 through extreme national effort, but really they've got no more than 4 of these in any given area. And they're older battleships. They're gone at this point. If they're retained, they're not comparable to modern battleships, so don't even consider them. Other countries would continue to operate older battleships. Turkey, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. None of these ships are going to be significantly modernized, and none of them are going to be able to stand toe-to-toe, even with the cruiser killers like Alaska or Scharnhorst or Dunkirk that are far more modern and can do more damage with even smaller projectiles. So they'll still be around in this alternate world, but I don't think they're going to be much use. So it's time for you in the comments section to let me know what you think I got wrong, what other ships you think would have been built. Remember, the scenario is there is no war in 1939 like Hitler promises his admiral, so it's around 1945 that all this tension comes to a head and World War II happens. So everybody has time to complete all these battleships that were designed but not built. So let me know what you think could have been built during that time in the comment section. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State and also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your continued support. There's a link to donate to us down in the description below. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about our channel. Thanks for watching.